Olá, TUTAMÉIA está ao vivo nesse Brasil da pandemia turbinada pela ação criminosa de Bolsonaro. Estamos aqui nos nossos estúdios parentênicos, a Eleonora,
o Rodolfo,
e do outro lado da tela, do outro lado dessa América, está conosco Vijay Prashad, que é diretor do Instituto Tricontinental. A Eleonora vai apresentá-lo com mais detalhes daqui a alguns instantes, mas nesse momento eu quero convidar o Vijay e convidar você que está conosco para a gente se somar num grande abraço, mandar uma grande mensagem de carinho para todos os parentes, amigos, conhecidos das vítimas da Covid-19 no Brasil. É uma multidão que só faz o Brasil sofrer mais, né, por causa da ação criminosa aí do Bolsonaro. Segundo o boletim do início da tarde de hoje, já são 139.294 mortes aqui no Brasil por causa da ação do vírus, com 4.634.468 casos. É um crime que está acontecendo no Brasil. Eleonora.
De fato, esse é um dos assuntos que a gente quer conversar com o Vijay, que é a questão do Covid-19 no mundo e no Brasil. Vijay é historiador e jornalista indiano, é autor de 30 livros, incluindo Balas de Washington, que acabou de ser lançado aqui no Brasil, pela Expressão Popular. Tem outros sobre o terceiro mundo, sobre as relações Sul-Sul, é correspondente-chefe da Globetrotter e colunista do Frontline da Índia, editor-chefe da Leftward Books, de Nova Delhi, e tem atuações também na área cinematográfica. Vijay, thank you so much for you to join us in this day. I would like to begin asking you about the pandemic. We just saw the numbers in Brazil. What's your view of the political, economic, and social impacts of the pandemic in the world? What's your view of the situation?
First, thank you for letting me join you. Secondly, I'm sorry I don't speak Portuguese. I can speak Indian languages, but we have to tolerate some English between us. Diseases are a normal feature of the human experience. Human beings interact with nature. Animals give us diseases. This is a normal feature of the human experience. Nothing unusual about that. We call this the novel coronavirus, the new coronavirus. But there have been many viruses before. We have avian flus before, whether it's H1N1, H2N5. I mean, there are a series of avian flus. We live close to chickens. We domesticate chickens. We may get a flu. There's nothing unusual about this flu. I think it's very important to understand that over the course of human history, human beings have been hit by animal viruses. Humans have provided viruses to animals. The issue here is that we have a political, economic, and social system in large parts of the world that has been unable to deal with the disease. In China, for instance, they first got wind of the virus. They first heard of the virus in December of 2019. It took them some weeks to understand the nature of the virus. Let's say by the 26th of December, a doctor said, this is a very different kind of virus. 26th of December. On January 20th, they understood that this virus can go from human to human. You see, if a virus moves from animal to human, that's one thing. When a virus moves from human to human, that means you have to take certain policy precautions. The Chinese government warned the world on the 31st of December that there was a dangerous virus in Wuhan province. By the 20th of January, they had announced it goes from human to human. Countries in the world that have scientific, rational governments, like Vietnam, like Laos, like Cuba, and so on, took immediate measures to protect their population. Countries which have completely hallucinogenic governments, governments that hallucinate about policy, like the government in India of Narendra Modi, like the Italian government, the English government, the American government of Donald Trump, and of course, Mr. Bolsonaro's government in Brazil, they have a hallucination attitude to science. They took no interest in what the World Health Organization was saying, what the Chinese government was saying. And because many of these governments had also cut back on public health spending, a combination of lack of spending and attention to public health and a very cavalier, inhuman attitude to what the WHO, the World Health Organization, was saying, didn't prepare these countries for a very normal virus. And so you see the United States, India, and Brazil competing in the Olympics of inhumanity. These three countries are deciding which is going to have the worst record with the novel coronavirus. Again, I don't blame the novel coronavirus for this. That's just something that happens in nature. How is it possible, Eleonora and Rodolfo, how is it possible that a poor country like Laos has 11 million people. It has a border with China. People are going back and forth between China and Laos. My friends, Laos has had 0 fatalities. Let me repeat that. Laos, a country which borders China, has had 0 fatalities. Brazil has an entire ocean on one side that divides it from China and an ocean on the other that divides it from China. Let me ask you, how many people have died in Brazil? Do you blame this on the virus? Or do you blame this on the governments? The Temer government that started cutting healthcare spending and the Bolsonaro government that didn't care about this virus. What do you blame this on? You want to blame it on an act of nature or an act of capitalism and insensitivity? And I know when I point the finger, I will not point my finger at a virus because that's a normal thing in nature. I will point my finger at the government of Narendra Modi of India. I will point my finger in the neoliberal policy that has over the last 30 years destroyed our public health system. That is the reason why by October 6th, October 7th, India will be the #1 country in cases and deaths, will overtake the United States. It's not because of the virus, it's because of capitalism.
And what were the actions of these governments that made the virus so deadly in their countries? Or they actually have a policy of death?
Look, I did a story where I interviewed Brazilian healthcare trade union leaders and lawyers because they have put a court case at The Hague, at the International Criminal Court, where Brazilian healthcare unions have charged President Bolsonaro and his government with genocide. The reason they've charged the government with genocide is there is a government in Brazil that vetoed a bill to enable water provision in the Amazon. You see, it's one thing to say that World Health Organization tells us, wear a mask, keep your hands clean, use alcohol sanitizer and wash your hands. In the Amazon region, in the Northeast, water delivery to people's homes is very low. The Brazilian parliament said we need to provide water to people's homes, and the Bolsonaro government vetoed that legislation. In the middle of a pandemic, you are not providing people water to wash their hands when the WHO has said simple things like hand washing are going to keep you alive. So the Brazilian trade unions of healthcare workers have taken the Bolsonaro government to the International Criminal Court charging genocide. I was interviewing Arundhati Roy, famous writer from India. She said to me, we need to create a tribunal to try the Indian government of Narendra Modi for crimes against humanity. On what basis? I'll tell you on what basis. We knew from the 31st of December that there was a very dangerous virus in Hubei province, China. We knew this because the Chinese government informed the World Health Organization on the 31st of December 2019. The Indian government did nothing. In Kerala, a state inside India, which is governed by a communist government, the health minister, her name is K.K. Shailja, she heard the news about the virus in Hubei province. She immediately created a task force because she said, we have students from Kerala studying in Hubei province. Everybody that comes from China will be tested in the airport. They will have a temperature check, simple temperature check. If they have a fever, we will put them in quarantine. This is in January of 2020. January of 2020. What was Narendra Modi doing in January, February, March? In March 11th, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. What was Jair Bolsonaro doing in 11th March, 12th March, 13th March, April, May, June? He was walking around without a virus, making jokes, saying it's just a cold. His son was saying it's a Chinese. These are not serious people. A serious government takes the well-being, the health of their population seriously. These are not serious people. They are very loose with the health of their public. You see, this is the reason why Brazilian healthcare unions have taken Bolsonaro to The Hague, to the criminal court. I would like the Indian healthcare unions to take Modi to The Hague. I would like healthcare unions in the United States, Nurses United is the name of the union, to take Donald Trump to The Hague. I mean, we should be outraged by the fact that Jair Bolsonaro, Narendra Modi, Donald Trump have collapsed on the job. While, and I will say this, Rodolfo, Eleonora, I think your viewers do not know the name of the Prime Minister of Vietnam. Why is it that Prime Minister Nguyen was able to produce a policy that today Vietnam, which has a long border with China, has only had 35 deaths? 35 deaths. There are small hospitals in Brazil that have seen more deaths than Vietnam. So this should make the population annoyed. And yet, in Brazil, in India, in the United States, the approval rating of Bolsonaro, Modi, Trump has gone up. Can you explain to me why? No, you explain why.
But how can you explain that? Is that the power of the fake news? Is that how can you explain that?
Look, let's not be too quick to explain this. Because if we can explain this, then we can understand how to build a big left force. We have a serious problem. You see, is it the fact that the media in India, the Times of India and Republic TV and this and that, in Brazil, Globo, and Fox News in the US, is it a fact that the media plus WhatsApp groups and so on have ruined our brains? Is that the only issue? Or, second point, we live in societies that have a wretched cultural problem. Machismo, masculinity, the machismo of Bolsonaro, Trump, and Modi. We have failed in our societies, in our cultures, to confront this masculinity. We have failed. This attitude of we are tough. What do we care? We don't need to take care of our population. It will take care of itself. If people die, it's because they are weak. This attitude, this is a macho attitude. And I would like to say that we on the left, we have failed to confront some cultural problems in our society. We are correct in emphasizing economic issues. We are correct in emphasizing political issues. But behind and underneath us, there is a cultural rot. Our societies are rotten. We have allowed machismo to completely destroy the fabric of our societies. I've been to Brazil many times. Brazil has had, just as an example, has had a history where there has been no need to confront certain hierarchies. There wasn't a liberation movement. Simón Bolívar, San Martín, all of that happened around Brazil. Brazil didn't have actually an anti-slavery movement. Racism, sexism, homophobia, in India, caste hierarchy. It's wretched. Our culture in India is being destroyed by the fact that we haven't destroyed caste hierarchies, gender hierarchies, patriarchy. Unless we on the left confront these things, these macho people like Bolsonaro and Trump and Modi will appear, Erdogan. They will appear as the saviors of the nation, We don't need saviors of the nation. We need a government that takes care of people, not the nation. The nation doesn't need a champion. People need champions. And people need to be the champion of our own lives. See, that part of the problem with this terrible nationalism is that a Modi will appear saying, I will save the nation. Hey, Mr. Modi, why are you saving the nation? What about the hundreds of thousands of people that are dying? That are dying of poverty? 700 million Indians don't know where to get food from. Who's saving them? You are busy saving the nation. Mr. Bolsonaro, you're saving the nation. What about the Amazon? It's on fire. What about the indigenous people in the Amazon who are... No, you are saving the nation, the pride of Brazil or the pride of India. We don't want the pride of these abstractions. I'm asking you, what about the real people with flesh and bone and skeletons? You are busy saving abstractions. We are worried about reality. And somehow they have been able to convert majorities of people to believe that the abstraction is more important than the real people. And I think, look, as I said, I don't have an explanation why the approval rating rises. I just have some observations. And one observation is that we on the left have not effectively confronted hierarchies. And these hierarchies have allowed them to champion abstractions rather than the actual lives of people. And that's that's something we need to reflect on. We need to focus on. You cannot build a politics unless you confront patriarchy and racism, because it ruins society. And our politics is built on an equal society. It's not built on an unequal society. So for me, I'm a Marxist, but I still think we have to emphasize the struggle against racism and patriarchy, not just the class struggle. A class struggle cannot happen in a society where women don't feel equal, where people of African descent do not feel equal, or people of oppressed caste don't feel equal. If we don't confront those directly, cannot build a movement.
Vijay, we are seeing that the pandemic is increasing inequalities. You just said that. Talk about inequality. The riches are increasing their gains, and the poor are the ones that are dying the most, and the unemployment rates are rising in Brazil too. Could it be different? Could it have been different?
Yes.
The economic and social consequences of, because you are going to have a world, a worst, more unequal world.
So we should first look. I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I don't see the world as one globe. Mm-hmm. I see that there are some differences already in the world. Look, in China, for instance, where the pandemic began, or rather the virus first made its appearance, the total deaths in the whole pandemic are happening every day in India. In China, they were able to actually break the chain of the infection. But that's not the whole story. China, I don't know what people's assessment of China is. It's not paradise, but let's be fair about one thing. The government decided to take an enormous amount of their surplus, their tax yuans, their money, and put it towards the people. They spent billions of yuan in preventing suffering during the pandemic. This is not speculation. This is not ideology. This is the evidence. What did they do? They immediately came and put a floor on the people, saying, we will feed everybody. In Hubei province, we'll take care of everybody. We'll provide cash transfers and so on. So in China, what you've seen is already by the third quarter of the year, you're already seeing the economy have growth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now, the International Labour Organization just released a very important report where they showed that the international working class and peasantry has lost $3.5 trillion in income in the past 6 months. And I haven't yet looked at the raw data by country. I just read the report. They also will provide the raw data. I want to see per country what has been the loss. I'm sure it's great in India, in Brazil, and so on. But in China, the International Monetary Fund, the FMI, already says that by the third and fourth quarter of the year, China will be one of the few countries that sees an upturn. Why? Because right at the beginning of the pandemic, they provided income support. Mm-hmm. And if you provide income support, people have money in order to buy, and you keep the economic activity going. Or at least, if people aren't buying, they have confidence that there's money in the bank because they've got income support. If you are now, as in many countries like India and I know in Brazil, if you're beginning to rely on your savings and you don't know when you will see the employment situation improve, then you will not want to spend money. If you don't buy an extra shirt, or you decide, look, this month we'll only eat meat 5 times. No feijoada, no this, no that. We're just going to eat simple food. you start holding back your consumption, economic activity will go down. We know that a lot of economic activity happens because of confidence. If I have confidence that I'll get money next month, then this month I'll go to the shop and buy my children a new pair of shoes. If I'm not confident that next month I'll get paid, then I'll tell my children, listen, children, sorry, no shoes this month. And economic activity goes down. So what you see is in China as a good example, because they put a floor under everybody. They said income support to everybody. They used their wealth for that. And because they have such a large internal economy, China has 1.4 billion consumers, that if you are not able to sell things abroad, you can sell things internally. That's actually, they are fortunate. But by the way, India also has 1.4 billion consumers.
Yeah.
But because India is half the population in relative poverty, it's difficult to pivot. And because 40% of Indians roughly don't have access to proper banking, it's difficult to provide income support. I mean, it's a much different world than China. When people say to me, friends, when they say, oh, China has this problem, that problem, I always tell them, India got its independence in 1947. China won its revolution in 1949. At that time, both countries were about at the same place. About at the same place. Today, China is over here. India has just advanced a little bit. Now, you tell me we should have a debate about communism, whether China is really communist or not. Your debate is boring. If I was an Indian landless worker, I would prefer to be Chinese today any day. Any day. I don't care what some academic in Brazil or in Geneva or in London or New York, what their assessment of China is does not interest me. Is it really communist? Is it capitalist? Have they restored capitalism? That to me is a boring conversation. China has obliterated poverty. Every year, tens of millions of people leave poverty. In India, every year, tens of millions of people come back to poverty. You tell me, which will you prefer? So when we say, was there a different way to deal with the coronavirus recession? Yes, there was. To build the confidence of people saying, we are going to now, in a time of crisis, the government comes in, provides income support to everybody, gives you the confidence to continue, and then let's wait out. It's right now a calamity. Eventually the calamity will go away. Let the government come and protect us during a calamity. That's why we have governments. When there's a hurricane, when there's a natural disaster, the government is supposed to provide assistance. That's why we have a government. It's what makes us civilized. If the government disappears during a calamity, why have a government?
This is what happens here in Brazil. Yeah. This is what happens here in Brazil. The government or the federal government just said, I'm not here. And you take care. You governors or mayors or you citizens, you take care. And people cannot take care.
Well, how are they supposed to take care? I mean, it's a question, right? How are they supposed to? In India, for instance, the central government wants to tell people what to do, but it doesn't want to take care of them. You see, it wants to make laws saying you can do this, you can do that. What's the point of you making laws over there in New Delhi and then letting me die over here on the street? A government, I'll give you two formulas and I'll leave it at that. Formula number one, a government should not be judged based on its constitution. In Brazil, your constitution is from 1988, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. It's a very good constitution. It's a very good constitution. In India, our constitution is from 1950. Very good constitution. Don't judge a government by its constitution. Judge a government by its budget. What was the last budget that Bolsonaro passed? In the budget, you will see the reality of the government. How much money did they spend on military? How much money did they spend for the business class? And then what did they do for the poor? In the constitution, it will say the poor get this, we give land reform, agrarian reform, and so on. In the budget, there is zero for agrarian reform. So the budget is a better indicator of a government and a country than its constitution. That's the first law. Take it as a law. The second law is, what has the government done for you today? What has the government done for you today? Today they came and took taxes. What did they do for you? You see, in China, when the pandemic broke out, the government did a lot for the people. They came, they closed this Hubei province down. Doctors came in, took care. They built 2 hospitals in days and so on. So if I asked a Chinese person, what did your government do for you today? Well, I got a check. They built a hospital, all these things. In India, I asked, what did the government do for you today? They did nothing. They arrested the best person in my neighborhood who said, what are you doing for me today? They arrested them. So I better not say anything. The government is... The second law, what has your government done for you today? I think people need to ask themselves that question.
Okay, we are seeing the inequalities growing in the world, but on the other hand, people say that we are also seeing the failure of the neoliberalism and the evidence that governments must interfere in the economy, and at least in some basic areas. Do you think this will, the world will learn a lesson of this, of what we're living now? Or this will just go and...
Rudolfo, again, what do we mean by the world? That's the real question.
I mean, the new liberal countries,
Yes.
that they'll learn a lesson about after this.
But even in these countries, what do we mean? For instance, the Narendra Modi government in India, the government of the far right in India, it's not capable of learning any lessons. See, if your approval rating is going up and you're doing nothing and you're doing this nonsense, what lessons should you learn? If Mr. Bolsonaro's approval rating is going up, which is what's happening in Brazil, and it just drives me crazy when I see that.
Yeah.
Okay, why should he learn a lesson, Rodolfo? What does he care that Afro-Brazilians are dying at higher rates than, Brazilians of Italian and Spanish descent? What does he care? Does he care really? This is a person, before he got elected, who said some horribly racist and sexist and homophobic things. What does he care? Is he embarrassed by world opinion? Not at all. Not at all. Is Mr. Modi embarrassed? Not at all. Is Mr. Trump embarrassed? On the contrary. Trump is proud, it seems to me. We are in a very dangerous period in world history where these right-wing leaders, whether it's in Poland or in Brazil or India or in America, whatever, these right-wing leaders don't care about public opinion. They don't care about the violence that is appearing in their countries. They don't care about this. So now the question comes, what about the technical economists? Just as in a bracket, I'll ask a question. What about the serious economists? All our countries have very serious economists that worry about the economy and so on. They should be very worried. And I'll tell you very quickly why. The International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, the World Economic Forum, all of them forecast that the United States of America for the for the rest of 2020 and into 2021 will have a decline in economic activity. All of these, basically Western agencies, are all saying the United States of America will see a decline of economic activity. they are all saying that China is going to have an increase of economic activity as the year goes on. And yet, India and Brazil have decided to break with China economically and integrate even tighter with the United States. Now, I would like to ask a simple question to the Indian citizens and the Brazilian citizens. Have you lost your mind? Here a ship is sinking. Here a ship is floating. You are in a little dinghy, a little boat in between. On one side of the boat is Bolsonaro, on the other side of the boat is Narendra Modi. You are in that little dinghy. Where do you want to go? Do you want to attach your dinghy with a rope to the sinking ship? Or do you want to attach your boat to a ship that's moving along the ocean? This is what is a definition of insanity. See, why are these countries breaking more and more with the Chinese economically? I'm just talking about economically, not politics. You see, with Huawei, ZTE, these are the 5G technologies. In terms of basically integrating with the Chinese growth engine, not only in China, but also the Belt and Road Initiative along all the way out to Italy and down into Africa. Right now, the Chinese engine seems to be restarting. Engine in the United States has gone cold. What is going on with these economists? They are so blinded by geopolitics and ideology that they prefer to see their countries attached to the United States like this. And they were okay with breaking with China. This seems to me slightly insane for the self-interest of these countries. You see, what is Brazil doing? Why would you break with Huawei, which has sophisticated next generation of 5G technology, which you can use, for instance, to fight fires in the Amazon? Why would you break with that and attach to a economic project that's collapsing and is not providing you with the latest technology at a price you can afford? So on the one side, there is the Modis, Bolsonaros, the political people. I get it. They have a project. They are delusional. But rational people who are in business, in finance, in economics, these people are rational. Their interest in life isn't necessarily ideological. It's to make money, to create systems that function. In that sense, they are more, at least they should be more rational. They are motivated by profit, not ideology. So I can understand that the Modis and Bolsonaros, they can be deluded into a wrong policy. But it's interesting to me that your business people, your bankers, your finance people are also ideological. They are pro-American to the point that they have forgotten that their reason for existence is profit and advancement. You see, that's what's bewildering. I talk to Indian businessmen and I say, why are you in favor of cutting ties with China? As a business person, the Chinese market is enormous and it's right next door. So logically, you should be interested in an economic engagement with China, not for ideological reasons, but for merely commercial reasons, profit reasons. But you see, even this class has completely become pro-US. And this is the impact of imperialism. Rather than the root of capitalism. They are no more just capitalists. They are influenced by imperialism.
The mentality of the imperialism, colonialism, and the fear of the left. You have spoken a lot about imperialism, colonialism. These expressions are have been long time out of the repertoire of the left. Why it's important now to talk about imperialism and colonialism? now in the 21st century? Is imperialism more active today?
Well, Eleonora, I would like to say it's not more active today. You know, one of my professions is I'm a journalist, and I make my living as a journalist actually. And in the last few decades, I've spent a lot of time traveling in Iraq, in Libya, in Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Mali, the Sahel region, Niger, Chad, and so on. I've spent a lot of time in that region. It would be interesting to have a conversation with an Iraqi about how imperialism is now asserting itself. And an Iraqi would say to you, Eleonora, what was the sanctions regime in Iraq during the 1990s, Eleonora? Can you explain that to me? When my children were dying in front of me because we couldn't get medicines, Eleonora, tell me, how do you explain that? What was that? You see, in Europe and the United States and maybe in other places, they didn't call it imperialism because lots of intelligent people are embarrassed to use language like that.
Yeah.
They have a sense of embarrassment. They think you sound like a crazy leftist. You know, somebody from the past. How embarrassing. It sounds crude to say imperialism. You know, okay, I sound like a crude, anachronistic person. But I have been in the home of Iraqis where they have physically been deformed by bomb blasts, where they have lost children as a consequence of the US sanctions. When a United Nations report was released in 1996 that said that 500,000 Iraqi children were killed because of the American sanctions, the American ambassador to the UN, Madeleine Albright, on television said it's a price worth paying. She said the 500,000 children dead in Iraq is a price worth paying. Madam Ambassador, a price who is paying? Not American children. It's Iraqi children, 500,000 of them who died because of the US sanctions. US government never denied it. That was Bill Clinton's government, not a Republican. Bill Clinton's government never denied that their policy killed 500,000 Iraqi children. Now, how do you explain that to me? Is it an accident? They died of a calamity? No, they died of a policy driven by the US government. That's the basic definition of imperialism. Look what they're doing to Venezuela today. Explain to me what is happening to Venezuela today with any other narrative than imperialism. We are in the middle of a pandemic. Venezuela has had its wealth stripped from it. Oil prices collapsing, its gold in London taken from it. Venezuela, in good faith, goes to the IMF, what I suppose is the FMI in Washington, D.C., and says, we want this special loan that the IMF has now provided to countries. They ask with good faith. The US Treasury Department informs the IMF, you cannot lend to this government in Venezuela. Tell me, what is that?
What about the gold Venezuela has in Britain?
That's right. The gold was seized in the Bank of London. How do you explain that? Now, I am not uncomfortable. Many people can say this guy is crazy. He talks crazy stuff. He's from another period. He shouldn't be alive in 2020. He's talking like he's in 1965. That's okay. You can say whatever you want, but give me a better explanation. Give me, if you want me to change my opinions, give me a better explanation why the US government is blockading Cuba. Give me a better explanation. What has Cuba done to deserve this? Cuban doctors of the Henry Reeve Brigade are in 55 countries fighting COVID-19. Human Rights Watch, a so-called human rights organization, it's a disgraceful organization, has released a report accusing the Cuban government of running a human trafficking network. They accused the Henry Reeve Brigade of human trafficking. This is a human rights organization based in New York City. It's exactly what Mr. Rubio, Senator Rubio, has said about the Henry Reed Brigade. It's a disgrace. So give me another explanation for this blockade on Cuba in the middle of a pandemic. I cannot explain it in any other way. So, Eleonora, I am happy to use words like imperialism, and I will continue to use them, not because I am a person of habit. You know, I have a habit of using these words, and I can't get out of the habit. No, it's because this is the best category to explain what's happening. It is a government using its military, its diplomatic, its financial power to suffocate other countries whose governments it doesn't like. That's the definition of imperialism. It's a government that uses its military, its economic, its financial, its political, its diplomatic, its cultural power to suffocate a country whose government it doesn't like. Now, that seems to describe exactly what the United States government is doing to Venezuela, to Cuba, to Iran, what they did to our brother Evo Morales Ayma of Bolivia. It describes it perfectly. If you can describe it with a different way, I will surrender. I will surrender. I am not an obstinate man. I am not an anachronism. The term for me is not anachronistic. It is perfectly a legitimate way to describe what I see outside my window.
And imperialism is also the theme of your latest book, Washington Bullets. That is I've read it and I felt like I was reading a new form of the open veins of Latin America. You know, it was because when you read that, the riches being ripped off our people is what you feel when you read your book. So please tell us a bit about this Washington Bullets. Balas de Washington, que foi lançado, já está disponível aqui no Brasil pela Expressão Popular. Né? Pode ser encontrado em contato direto com a livraria Expressão Popular ou nas livrarias.
Firstly, I mean, what you have said is, I would like the tape of that, and I would like to play it over and over again, and I'll explain why. I also want to very much thank my editor, Miguel Yoshida of Espresso Popular, because Miguel and the translators, if they were able to capture what I was trying to do, and if you said what you said to me, then they have done an excellent job. So I just think Miguel is one of the best people I know in Brazil, and he's a very close comrade. And we are on the 9th of October, 23 publishers around the world will release a small, short, free book of 2 Che Guevara essays with an introduction by Ejaz Ahmed, a preface by one of the top researchers at the Che Guevara Institute in Havana. So that will be released by Espresso Popular in Portuguese in Brazil for free. It's a free PDF on the 9th of October, which we want to, the day that they killed Che Guevara, we want to make that the International Day for the Abolition of the CIA.
Wow, great.
Great.
Galeano, Ernesto Galeano, was, I would like to call him a friend of mine. I met him several times. I was very, very moved by his books. And let me explain briefly, if I can, what moved me about his books. Ernesto Galeano from Uruguay experienced the worst of human behavior. Not personally, but he saw his friends and others be taken to torture, some of them killed. As the editor of a newspaper, he experienced great repression. Every time Galeano wrote about the Operation Condor, Every time he wrote about the junta of Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, Brazil, the coup from 1964 that lasted 21 years in Brazil, every time Ernesto wrote about this, he wrote beautifully. And I asked him, I met him in the first meeting I had with him. I said, Maestro, how come you write about such horrible things so beautifully? And he said, torture is a very ugly thing. Why should I make torture so ugly in my prose that the reader experiences as torture? I want them to understand what torture is, but I don't want to torture them. I want them to understand torture, but I don't want to torture them because I want them to feel hope. I want them to feel like they can struggle to overcome torture and these regimes. So I did not want to write a book which made people feel powerless before the CIA, powerless before American imperialism. I wanted poetry. I wanted mischief in the writing. I wanted the writing to enable the reader to feel I can defeat them. Our purpose in writing, in speaking, in talking is not to make people feel demoralized. I just feel the need to explain this a little bit. You and I as journalists, both of you and I as journalists, we don't tell people things. Listen, people, listen to what we've discovered. I read a report and I want to tell you about it, people. That's what a good journalist does, correct? I interviewed somebody and I have a story I want to tell you. But what I learned from those conversations with Galeano is I don't want to tell you this something to make you feel depressed, to make you feel disarmed, to make you surrender from history. I want to share with you what I've learned about the terrible things of life to make you feel like you can change things. And so in writing this book, I thought a lot about how to tell the story. And I wanted to tell you the story, Eleonora and Rodolfo. I wanted to tell you the story so that you will tell other people the story. And every time you tell other people the story, every person you talk to feels, I can change it. That's what left journalism is about. As journalists of the left, our motive is not to tell people things so they get depressed. We tell them things so they feel confident they can change the world. And I think that's what Marx meant when he said philosophers so far have interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. And in fact, I think Marx was wrong. The actual line should have been, you cannot understand the world unless you want to change it. Mm-hmm. I think Marx was wrong. I'm sorry to revise Marx. Because, you see, you cannot understand the world unless you want to change it.
In Washington Bullets, you talk about the coup in Brazil. There is a story about Bolivia. And we have the hand of Washington in all these coups in Latin America. How do you see the situation today? Still Washington is leading the situation in Latin America. Is it changing? It's changing Argentina. What do you think about the election in Bolivia? What do you see the Latin America is going to, in which way?
It's hard to say because, well, firstly, it's, yes, you're right. Washington has its hand, but also it has very good allies.
Yeah.
So one of the things I love about Sao Paulo is there is a sort of obviousness about this. Sections of Sao Paulo, you walk around and there are these very fancy buildings with very high walls and barbed wire and observation posts, and you almost expect to see like Gaza, there's a gunner in the turret. Then there are these neighborhoods with enormous houses and, the rich. I like to walk around at night in Sao Paulo and go and meet the street children under the bridges and, the people who sleep on the street. I get my best stories from going out at night and, smoking a cigarette with some children under the bridge and just, seeing what is their world like, because the class system is so deep. So Washington has good allies in Sao Paulo, in those big buildings and those big houses. It's not like Brazil is powerless before Washington. Karl Liebknecht, a very famous German Marxist, friend of Rosa Luxemburg, he wrote a book saying the enemy is within our borders. The enemy is within our borders. There's a Syrian poet who wrote a line, said that the enemy didn't come through the front door. The enemy crawled into our house like ants. Washington is invited in by these kinds of people. You see, when the coup happened in '64, the United States sent ships off the coast of Rio and Sao Paulo. But the coup was done by the generals. It was a Brazilian coup. The coup in Bolivia last year was done by Bolivians. Williams Caliman, the general, goes to see our brother Evo Morales. Janet Anez is waiting. The thugs of Santa Clara, they are ready. You see, Washington is on the phone, sending signal messages and WhatsApp messages. But it's not directly involved. No American planes came. No actual bullet was fired by a Marine. There was no need. Like ants, they came in because we opened the door and let them in. So unless in Latin America, the people are able to strengthen their pole and confront their own problems inside their countries. You see, it's very clear that in a country like Bolivia, the elites don't have a majority. Look now, if there's an election tomorrow, Luis Arce and Mas will win the election. Look, in Ecuador, a poll came out recently that showed if Andrés Arauz was allowed to run with Correa as his running mate, they will win 45% of the vote and win in the first round. Lasso, the right-wing candidate, is polling at 30%. Arauz is polling at 45%. That's in Ecuador. The left will win in Ecuador tomorrow in election. In Bolivia, Mas will come back. If there was a real election in Brazil and Lula was allowed to run against Bolsonaro, Lula would have beaten Bolsonaro by miles, right? We know that. I mean, it's not the question that the left has been defeated. Let's be clear about that. In a real election, Lula would have walked over Bolsonaro, but they couldn't allow Lula to run, and hence they created this bizarre fiction. It's a fiction what they did to Lula. When I try to explain, as a reporter, I've written many articles trying to explain to people outside Brazil about what was done to Lula. It's impossible. Even I don't understand. There's an apartment, but Lula didn't live there. But he didn't have it. But the court said, but he's in prison. Is he in prison because he was found guilty? Well, not really. He's not really. In the first instance, in the second instance, what is going on? In Ecuador, the case against Rafael Correa is so bizarre. I don't understand it, actually. A lot of Ecuadorian legal specialists, I've asked them, what is the case against Correa? They are like, we don't even know. In Brazil, at least lawyers there will say in the first instance, in the second court, in the third something, and it's too confusing. Tell me frankly, is Lula guilty or not? they say, well, it's not about guilt or innocence. It's about the process. I don't care about the process. Is he guilty or not? He's not guilty. He is not guilty. This was a political persecution because they knew they would lose. So what is the future of Latin America? In one respect, people in Latin America should feel positive that there is a majority of people who don't like these scoundrels. Even though the approval rating may go in polls, they know in a fair election, because Lula had a policy of ending hunger, because Lula democratized higher education for all his limitations. Just take these two policies, democratize higher education and ending hunger. There are large numbers of people who will come to vote for that ticket. In Ecuador, Correa may not himself personally have a huge, but people will vote for Andres Arauz. Why? Because they know that in the period when Arauz was a minister in Correa's government, their life situation was better than it's now. So imperialism understands that. They will not tolerate a direct election. They know they cannot any longer actually do a full-scale military coup. You see, in Bolivia, they didn't do a military coup.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't, although it was a military coup, because why did they send Kaliman to talk to Morales? Why did they send the military? It was a military coup, but they pretended it was a coup about democracy. Same in Brazil. Dilma was not removed by the military. She was removed by a democratic coup.
Mm-hmm.
They cannot justify the military coming anymore. In Venezuela, they actually would be uncomfortable if the Brazilian army crossed the border and went into Venezuela. The Venezuelan people are very patriotic. They would not like that. They want to do a democratic coup. Because they know that actually there are majorities of people that are against them. So this is what people should take some hope from. People should take hope from that.
You said something very important. Imperialism does not like elections in democracy. It's incompatible. It's not. And how about the elections now in United States? What can you say about the election? Even a possibility of a coup in the United States is now in debate. Something is changing in the United States. We see this mobilization about racism. What's going on in the United States?
We used to joke, you may remember this joke. We used to joke that in the United States, you don't see a coup because in the United States, they don't have a US embassy. But in fact, the US democratic system has some problems. If you go back and you see the election between Al Gore and George W. Bush, it was decided by the Supreme Court. And it looked like Al Gore won the popular vote.
Yeah.
In the last election, Hillary Clinton, nobody denies, won the popular vote. This system is a strange system. It's created to preserve states that previously had the enslavement of human beings, the so-called slave state. So this electoral college system is a legacy of slavery. And they've never really democratized the system. It's not actually a democratic system. It's something, but it's not really democratic. So you don't actually have democracy in a modern way. It's a 19th century form of democracy. It's a form of democracy where you had to own property in order to vote. You'll remember in many countries, there were property qualifications, literacy qualifications, gender qualifications. You had to be a man with property who could write. Right? Well, this particular system in the United States, it's a 19th century democratic system. They haven't modernized their electoral system. It's actually anachronistic, frankly. If you look at like the Indian constitution is a much more modern constitution, and Indian elections is much more modern than the US election, because it's parliamentary system. In every parliamentary district, you have competitive elections. It's not two parties, and so on. In fact, even better if the Indian system absorbed ranked choice voting, very rational, where you as a voter can vote for 4 different candidates, and you rank them and so on. So that it doesn't have a tendency to go to 2 parties. There are ways to modernize elections. So I don't want anybody to think that the US system is the most highest form of democracy. It's an illusion. In fact, it's a very backward, anachronistic form of democracy. There are better democratic systems, because just plainly, Hillary Clinton should have won that election, because she won in terms of the numbers of people who voted for her, but she didn't. So that's one thing to take into consideration. There have been coups before. As I said, George W. Bush won by a judicial coup. Why don't we think of it as a coup? It was a judicial coup. The judiciary came and they stopped the counting and they gave the election to George W. Bush. In any other country in the world, we would have called it lawfare. Like you have in Brazil, lawfare. We would have said this is judicial fair or something. I would say that this interference in election is not a surprise. I think, Trump is a clown. He says these things. We won't respect the result and so on. But it is his way of exciting his voters. So his party came out yesterday, I saw, and said, no, we will respect the winner.
Yeah.
They didn't rebuke Trump. They just said, we'll respect the winner. But Trump has been saying every day, we will do this, we will do that. He will get his base excited in order for them to vote. And because they have a very clever strategy, they only need to win in 4 states, whether Michigan or Pennsylvania or Florida, these so-called swing states. There's a good chance Trump may win the election again. Very good chance. It's not so easy for the Democrats. Because firstly, the Democrats as a party are useless. They don't have a clear, precise agenda against Trump. We know in a modern election situation, you can't just run against somebody. You see, Haddad was running against Bolsonaro. Fernando Haddad is a very intelligent person. I had the privilege of having a conversation with him on Friday. And he struck me as a brilliant person. He was talking about how internationalism is so difficult. I was very impressed by him. But I know that in the election against Bolsonaro, he was defined by Bolsonaro. He could not effectively define Bolsonaro. He was responding to Bolsonaro. In the same way, Biden is just every day responding to Trump. In this sort of media democracy, if you don't have the upper hand, if you're not able to have the upper hand in in the field of politics, if you don't have Trump responding to you, Trump is going to win. So you have to have a much more aggressive agenda. And I don't mean macho agenda, by the way. I mean aggressive. You have to have a clear divide. We are going to put so many hundreds of millions of dollars to improve healthcare. And you, Trump, are destroying the healthcare system. That's a way to put him on the back foot. Every day have meetings with doctors. Every day talk to healthcare providers. Make this about healthcare. Make the whole election about the pandemic. But the Democrats can't, because they have participated in the last 40 years in destroying the healthcare system.
Yeah.
So you can't define the election like that. If there's an election tomorrow in Brazil, and the Workers' Party candidate makes the whole election a referendum about the pandemic, surrounds themselves with nurses. I interviewed a nurse from outside Sao Paulo, Juliana Rodriguez. She told me that she has a young daughter who she hadn't seen in months. She has an 11-year-old daughter. She hadn't seen her for 4 months. This is a hero, Juliana Rodriguez, a hero. I would put, if I was running against Bolsonaro in a campaign, I would have people like Juliana Rodriguez every day next to me. Every day I want them to talk about what they did in the wards, how they struggled, how they put garbage bags over their bodies as PPE because Bolsonaro didn't give them PPE and so on. I would make it a referendum on that. And then let's see. At least I would be aggressive.
Well, even though Trump may actually be re-elected in the States, some say that things are in a way changing, mostly because of the comeback of the masses to great protests, great manifestations, and things like that. Do you think this is correct? The people have come back to the streets and they are going to stay there and make their voices be heard?
You see, today is the first time that the three of us are meeting. We have not known each other before. Rodolfo, Eleonora, myself. We don't know each other. This is our first meeting. But we are all interested in politics. We follow the news regularly. We have all been, journalistic type people for a long time, correct? I mean, we have been like that. Every few years, we see in the United States a police officer killing somebody and then protests starting. From 1965 to the present, every few years, there is a cycle of extreme violence, protest calms down, the extreme violence continues, then there's one particularly terrible incident, 1965, then Watts riot, then 68, the murder of Martin Luther King, then blah, 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 1992, the Los Angeles uprising, blah, 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 Ferguson, blah, 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 Minneapolis. This thing keeps happening and the protests keep appearing. But these protests do not create a historical block.
Why?
Wow.
Yeah. Because
there is no party.
Pardon?
There is no party, no communist party to assemble.
That's exactly right. That's one issue. You're right. But the second issue is that there is a race problem in the United States. Look, why go to the United States? Let's come back to Brazil. Look at the behavior of the police with the favelas in Rio. Look how the police go in and they brutalize people and they kill people and so on. It happens on a punctual basis. Or the complete neglect of the Amazon and the people of the Northeast. And I mean, the terrible way in which the state operates. But then there is a population in the southeast of Brazil, which is blasé about this violence. You can walk the streets of even a relatively liberal area of Porto Alegre, and people just don't. It's not like a big deal that in Rio that day somebody was killed. In the United States, it's the same. If you go up and down the Americas, from New York City to Rio to Buenos Aires, there is actually a similar history of detachment from the violence that takes place in your name. It's not unfamiliar, I think, for the Americas. There's something quite similar. That brutality that happens in your name but somewhere else, that you don't think is connected to you. So until people in the United States feel that every time a black man or black woman is killed, Breonna Taylor is killed, every time somebody feels that's a violation against them. I mean, I'm talking about culturally now, not politically. You see, somebody will say, oh my God, I saw a child being shot. that child looks like my child, so I'm moved by it. What if the child doesn't look like your child? What if it's a child who was killed? Does it matter that it looks like your child or not? Until we are able to surmount these racial divides, you can't build a large enough political base against police violence. So in the United States, in this period, I saw this: defund the police and so on. Quite a good political momentum develops. But then they break that immediately because they come in there, that is both the Democrats and Republican Party, and they come in there and they feel that this attack is an attack on the state, not an attack on racism. And they start defending the state. See, the left has to be able to demonstrate to the public that when the left criticizes the police, it's criticizing an aspect of state behavior that is not attacking the institutions of government or the idea of government. Because the bourgeois parties, the Democrats, Republicans, they want to protect the state as an institution. And even the people on the left don't want to bring cynicism. We also have an investment in state institutions and so on. So how do you, when you attack the police, attack racism without creating cynicism in the population? These are very great challenges. I'm just laying out some challenges. It's not that easy, but particularly the racist barrier is very high. When Eric Garner was suffocated to death in New York City, this black man was killed on the street. People said, oh, well, but he was selling illegal cigarettes. Is that a reason to kill somebody? Well, he was doing something wrong. Oh, George Floyd, he was trying to pass a counterfeit $20 bill. Is that a death sentence? Do you get sentenced to death for passing a $20 bill? Why was Eric Garner selling cigarettes, single cigarettes? Why, which is illegal? Why was George Floyd passing a $20 bill? This has to do with poverty in the community. Why don't we look at it as poverty and not crime? But these are all cultural barriers. People say, oh, it's crime, it's blackness. And so you can't build effective majorities. At most, liberals will say, let's reform the police department. At most. Let's give them anti-racist training. But the point is not anti-racist training. The point is, why should a person have to pass a false $20 bill in a neighborhood? Why can't he get income support to allow him and his family to eat? Why does Eric Garner have to sell loose cigarettes? Why can't he get income support? And why does the police have as its main mission policing people for committing petty crimes of economic nature because they're trying to survive? These are broad questions which will help us create majorities. So in my opinion, the death of George Floyd, it was a racist attack, but it was also an attack against a poor man. And somehow we are not able to create a majority around what happened there. It gets defined as an attack of racism. But we forget that he was also killed because he was passing a false $20 bill. And it's an attack at a poor man trying to survive. Why do the police kill poor people? Why in a city like Sao Paulo, when a person is sleeping on the street, do they get harassed by the police? Is it a crime to sleep on the street? I don't have a house. Is it a crime for me to be alive? Is my body a crime? That's a question to ask our civilization. I am a crime. My existence is a crime. What I do, I have done nothing. My presence is a crime. We have created police forces that deal with people's existence as a crime. That we need to explain that to people and build majorities against that.
Vijay, we are seeing this crisis in capitalism since the 2008, but who gains from this crisis is the far right all over the world. We're seeing the rising of the far right. Why is that? Is there a connection between the far right parties, and why we don't have communist parties to talk about just what we're talking, to show the reality and show to the people why this crisis is happening?
A few years ago, I edited a book called Strong Men, which had essays on Modi, Trump, Erdogan, Duterte. No Bolsonaro, but the Italian edition of the book had Bolsonaro. Only the Italian edition. All the other editions, one of them had Russian, had Putin, but nobody had Bolsonaro except the Italian edition. Don't ask me why. Anyway, one of the reasons I edited that book, and it had amazing essays. The essay on Trump was written by Eve Ensler, the playwright. All the essays were written by artists. So by novelists, by actor. The article written on Narendra Modi was by Danish Hussain, who's an Indian actor, film actor. Eve Ensler is the one who wrote the play Vagina Monologues. She wrote a fantastic essay about Trump as a virus. This was written 3 years ago or 2 years ago. Anyway, in putting the introduction of the book together, I thought a lot about how over the course of the 1990s and 2000s, the neoliberal parties, the parties of the so-called center-right, they had basically committed themselves to globalization. Mm-hmm. And they had created policies that brought a lot of suffering in their countries, whether it's the United Kingdom or the US or whatever. And because of that, the ruling class of these societies, which has actually suffered more political turbulence, because they just keep changing their affiliations. The ruling class switches their affiliation to the far right. As long as the far right maintains the institutions of democracy. So what the ruling class doesn't actually want to see is a return to dictatorships. Because they know that dictatorships now have just a bad name, you know. Nobody wants a real dictatorship. See, in Brazil, every time the rumor comes, military is going to act, people say, no, we don't want the military. We don't mind a civilian government with lots of military people in it, including the vice president. We don't mind a civilian government with a lot of military people in it, but we don't want a military government. We don't want them in their military uniforms roaming around. So the ruling class shifts its allegiance to the far right because the neoliberal bloc no longer can really command majorities. Because what are you going to do? Go to the people and say, vote for us. We are going to create globalization, which is going to ruin your lives. You know, you don't have an agenda. But the far right has an agenda because they can come to people and say, yes, there's a crisis. As Donald Trump said in his inaugural address, there is a carnage. America has witnessed carnage. Our society has been destroyed by what? Not by capitalism, not really by globalization. It's being destroyed by Mexican immigrants, by homosexuals, by Chinese economy. You blame always somebody else. What the far right is able to do is they're able to create a constituency for an economy that doesn't work for the people. So in that sense, this is not fascism, because a fascism appears to destroy the left. The left is weak already. This is the far right coming in place of the neoliberals, because the far right can actually command a sufficient population to support them for all these crackpot ideas. You know, blame homosexuals, blame feminists, blame whatever Marxists. You know, and Trump is obsessed with Marxists. in the United States. I don't understand what he's talking about half the time. Even recently, he's banned books. I mean, I had a friend in the United States, Howard Zinn, wrote The People's History of the United States. Very lovely man. Trump, in a speech recently, attacked Howard Zinn. I thought, my God, Zinn has been dead. He said, no federal money can go to any program that criticizes US history. What are you talking about? But they're building majorities because there are some people, white Americans, who at least think of themselves as white, who feel I'm being made to feel bad about the history of the US. I'm being made to feel like I own slaves. Thanks, Trump. You're making me feel proud to be white again, and so on. So the far right appears to produce these actual majorities. Modi will come and say Hindus should not apologize for being Hindu again. When did Hindus ever apologize? But by saying that, he gives a certain population the feeling that Modi is for me. I may not have a job. I may not have healthcare. My whole family is dying of COVID-19. But Modi is for me. And that's why the approval ratings keep going up. And then simply, Modi will say something, or Bolsonaro will say something against homosexuals and a certain masculinity or a certain traditionalism. You see, certain evangelical families will say, look, he's the only one preventing our children from becoming homosexuals. As if your children are becoming homosexuals just like that, And Bolsonaro is the only one protecting your children from becoming homosexuals. Your children may be becoming homosexuals because they want to be homosexuals. There's nothing wrong with being, but I have a certain evangelical commitment or God or whatever it is. My relatives, my grandparents. Bolsonaro is protecting our family. I mean, it's a nuts idea. But it's what gives the far right political credibility for now. For now.
Is there some kind of articulation? Because we see exactly same speech in Brazil, in Trump, the pedophile conspiration. It's exactly the same. Is there some kind of articulation between the far right in the world?
Well, Steve Bannon is now in jail. He was arrested on a yacht for embezzlement of funds that were supposed to go to build the wall on the US-Mexico border. So Steve Bannon isn't running the whole far-right network. Not right now, because he's in jail. No, there is an articulation. Let's be quite frank about this. I don't think it's a conspiracy. But they talk to each other. Bannon's people went to help Nigel Farage and the Brexit campaign. They work in Eastern Europe with the far right. They have friendships and they have political consultants that go to Brazil to consult with Bolsonaro's son, to explain this is the agenda and so on. These people, there is media reporting about this. It's not a secret. It happens. But they also learn from each other. They watch each other, I'm sure. There is a internet phenomena about this pedophile ring business called Q and all. So there are some nuts ideas that are there, crazy ideas that exist. These don't exist in India. In India, we don't need QAnon. There are older conspiracies about Muslims and the left and plots. And every day, one of us is being charged with sedition. Today, one of my party leaders was charge sheeted. She was named in a case for instigating a riot. I have spoken at those rallies as well. I'm just waiting for the day that they put my name also. In fact, I want to start a campaign in India called 1 billion charged, where we all make videos saying, please take us to jail. please take us. We are ready. Let 1 billion people say, arrest me. In India, it's slightly different. We have our own tradition of far right attack on the left. They'll say left, Muslim, homosexual thing doesn't work in India. This requires a certain Christian. It requires a Christian fear of. In India, this doesn't play as much. The Muslim thing plays. Communist, Muslim, even just accusation of being a Christian works. You don't need to add homosexual.
Okay, we are speaking of the articulation of the far right. What about the other side, the progressive articulation? You few days ago, you participated in the launch of the Progressive International. So can you tell us a bit about this? What is the Progressive International? Who participates in that? And what are their goals?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that I'm involved in lots of international articulations. The one that I'm actually closest involved in is called the International Assembly of the Peoples, which came out of a meeting outside São Paulo at the ENFF, the Florestan Fernandes School of the Rural Landless Workers of the MST. And out of that meeting came the International Assembly of the People, which is a network of 200 international organizations, 200 organizations spread out over 100 countries. And it's been building for the last 5 years. It includes the MST and Patria Grande and others. And I think within a few months, we will also have a public launch. And the institute I run, Tricontinental, is articulated with the International Assembly of the Peoples. So be ready for that. That's coming. I'm also involved in the Progressive International, which was an initiative that emerged out of Europe. Yanis Varoufakis was the finance minister of Greece who resigned from the Syriza government. Then he created a political party in Greece, and he is in parliament from that party. Then he created a movement called Democracy in Europe, DM25, which has a Europe-wide presence. And then out of all this dynamic, they created the Progressive International. It emerged out of a meeting in Vermont between the people around Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn. And then Ada Colau, the mayor of Barcelona, and others was there. It's a work in progress. It's a left formation, but it's not exactly it's not exactly 100% my politics of left. And because I am a united front person, I believe very much we need to build the totality of the left. So even if I have differences with people, this doesn't bother me. You see, Fernando Haddad is also part of the council of the Progressive International, and so is Alvaro Garcia Linera, and so is Eli Alcorta, who's a minister in the government of Alberto Fernandez in Argentina. This is the Latin Americans. From India, we have Jean Drèze, Aruna Roy, and so on. It's a very wide range of left politics, and I like that, honestly, because I think we need several different international articulations of the left. You see, we'll have the International Assembly of the People, which is a more left and more movement-based articulation, much more movement-based. Then we'll have something like the Progressive. We need many kinds of articulations. You see, I am not a sectarian when it comes to this. I agree with Chairman Mao. Let 100 flowers bloom and contend. You see, there's a second part to that saying. Let 100 flowers bloom and contend. Let them argue with each other. But first, let them bloom, right? Let 100 flowers bloom and contend. Let them bloom. So I am in favor. I get a little frustrated, if I'm honest with the two of you, with people who attack any new articulation by saying, oh, it's got this problem, that problem. History has lots of problems. Let's try to advance our agenda, not try to be perfect. You see, neither the two of you nor I can pretend to be God. We are flawed people. So let's try to bring reason into the world. Isn't that what left politics is? The attempt to bring reason into the world. We don't claim to ourselves be reasonable people. You know, I'm a very flawed person. Very flawed. I have a million personal and psychological flaws. I don't claim to know everything. So why should I judge everything so harshly, especially on the left? We should have a compassionate attitude to what we're building. So I welcome all articulations as they come. And I don't want them to tear each other apart. You know, that's the main thing.
You said in the beginning you are Marxist. You are wearing a Marx. Yeah. And you said also that the left is very weak nowadays. How can the Marxist ideas grow, and how do you see the future of Marxism in the world?
So the first thing I'd say is that we live in a capitalist world, and Marxism, as far as I'm concerned, provides the best analysis of the contradictions of capitalism. And I read pretty widely in other traditions, and I don't see as robust an understanding of capitalism. See, I'm not religious. So I'm not a Marxist by religious orientation. I'm a Marxist because it rationally explains to me the contradictions of capitalism. If another tradition appeared and explained it better, I might reconsider my being a Marxist. So I think that's important, that we are Marxists because of rationality, not by religion. Now, Marxism is an unfinished science. It's not like a religious tradition which is complete and then attempts to enter the world. Marxism constantly tries to analyze reality. That's why what Lenin said is correct. We are constantly doing a concrete analysis of the concrete condition. And that concrete analysis is not just about the conjuncture. It also might help us to understand if the structure is changing. So in that sense, Marxism is an unfinished science. It's always got to learn, develop, change, and so on. When I go back and read Marx's writings, I see that there are things that he's writing about which have dramatically changed in the present. The nature of credit markets, for instance, are quite different than when Marx was writing. The essence of what he was saying about credit is the same, but the markets look different today. So I have to be open to that. So in that sense, Marxism that I'm interested in has to constantly revitalize itself by testing itself against reality, trying to understand reality. That's the first. Secondly, I'm not interested in the Marxism that got stuck in Europe. The Western Marxism that was, as Perry Anderson rightly said, faced a situation of defeat and then began to doubt itself. So you then got the Frankfurt School and so on, which was built on doubt. No, my Marxism is the Marxism of Ho Chi Minh, it's the Marxism of Amilcar Cabral. You see, it's the Marxism of Florestan Fernandez. I'm interested in the writing of Helet Safioti. You know, I'm interested in Attilio Boron. I'm interested in Marxists in our part of the world. Prabhat Patnaik, Utsa Patnaik, you know, these people who are trying to understand the world from our perspective. The world of peasants, the other side of the imperialist divide, where there has not been defeat. You see, you cannot in a place like Brazil say that the left has been defeated. You just cannot say that. And I'll tell you why you can't say that. I visited these encampments and settlements of the MST. You walk through the settlement, you don't see defeat.
Yeah.
You see very proud people who are trying to build a new world.
That's right.
You know, so our Marxism begins in the settlement. Now, I know Quilombo Campo Grande was struck down. That was a disgrace. I know that. There are those defeats. But the people who were removed from that Quilombo Campo Grande, they will create another settlement. They will grow agroecological crops. They will build another school named after Eduardo Galeano. I was very, very upset when I heard the Eduardo Galeano school was broken. I phoned Noam Chomsky and I said, Noam, our friend Galeano had a school named after him in that Quilombo. And Noam and I released a statement condemning the destruction of Quilombo Campo Grande. Why? Because we were with the people, but we were also in the memory of Galeano. Sentimentally. We have not been defeated. In India, my party, I belong to a communist party, we have 1 million members. 1 million members. In India, that's nothing. But we have 1 million members. We have hundreds of millions of people in our mass organizations, peasant organizations, agricultural workers, trade unions, and so on. Our Marxism is built out of our experience. So the second point I was making, the first point is that it's an unfinished science. Second point is I don't take my lessons from Western Marxism, which is a Marxism built in defeat. You know, I don't take my lessons from Althusser and I don't take my lessons from them. I don't read them as carefully as I read the theorists of our movement. I find far more interesting a conversation with João Pedro Stedile than a conversation with any European intellectual. Anybody, Zizek or anybody, I find them boring. I find João Pedro much more interesting because João Pedro is a thinker who's rooted in the struggle, in the luta de classes, as he says. He's rooted in the class struggle. He's not rooted in defeat. So when you ask me about the Marxist tradition, I say the Marxist tradition is alive and well.
And how about the party? You said, talk about the Communist Party in India, but here in Brazil, Communist Party is, we don't have it. It lacked the organization, or there is some kind of new organization, because this kind of non-organization is difficult to build a party, no?
Well, in India, we have many communist parties. I belong to the biggest one, the Communist Party of India, Marxist. We have a Communist Party which was pro-Soviet. We have the Communist Party of India, Marxist Leninist Liberation. We have the Maoists. We have a whole bunch of, like you have PC Dubé, Communist Party Brazil, and so on. How to say this? We are also in a journey. In India, the left parties work together. We have a left front. We work together. We understand that we confront a common enemy and our differences are minor. So we've been in government together in Bengal and Kerala. We work together in mass struggles in the trade union movement. We have a unity in action. We don't have a unity in organization. In Brazil, perhaps it would be valuable to have the left under the banner of a left front. I know that you keep creating front against this, front for that. It's a common feature in Brazil now. Fora Bolsonaro, this, that, and the other. I know that. But it may be useful to think about making a left front of all the organizations, you know, maybe including the Workers' Party, which is organizationally quite weak, it seems to me, from my experience. You know, I mean, this is a thing that we are struggling with. But we have an articulation of unity, which is not around issues. It's not an anti-fascist forum, or it's not a pro-farmer forum. It's a left front. that we believe that on most issues we have the same policy orientation. We should operate together in parliament, we should operate on the streets together. Now, why we don't combine organizationally is we do have some important differences. We differ on our understanding of the bourgeoisie, we differ on our assessment of other parties and so on. So there's no need to combine organizationally as long as we are working in the same direction. If we organizationally combine later, that's separate. But we should not be attacking each other. We should not be working against each other. We've got to work together. The left is different from the right because we believe in ideas. They believe in power. So the right has an easier time combining because what unites them is this: they seek power. We don't seek power, we seek the correct line. And this is one of our both good things and bad things. We are not motivated by power, we are motivated by ideas. But because we are not motivated by power, we don't combine in order to seek power. Also, the left has to learn to fail. In other words, you got to take risks. You got to go out there and seek power and make mistakes and fail. You can't always be right. We have been in government many times and done terrible, stupid things. Then we get voted out, then we come back. You have to have the confidence to fail. And it would be interesting to see the communist left combining and seeking office, across the world. In India, we have been in power. In Kerala right now, we are in power. We used to have the government in Bengal for 34 years. So, and only because we went into alliance with other left forces. So, it's hard to tell. Look, in the southern cone in Chile, you see the Communist Party has made some return because of the youth movement.
Yeah.
These few very dynamic youth leaders led the way. In Argentina, the Communist Party is not there. It's really not there. In the Andes, the Communist Party is really not there also. Only Venezuela, there's a small Communist Party. It's not a huge party. But in South America, the communist movement itself was destroyed by juntas and God knows what. So it's a weak force. In India, we are a much stronger. We have an unbroken tradition from 1920. This is our 100th anniversary. Our party has had an unbroken history for 100 years. In South America, no party has had an unbroken history. You've all had to go underground, illegal, this, that. It breaks it's a very complicated history. I feel compassion for South American communists. People have been thrown out of planes and killed.
Yeah.
We also suffered repression. We went to jail and so on, but we've had an unbroken history. And still we are weak, by the way, Eleonora. Still we are weak. So
yeah, but here we see that it seems that for some parts of the left movement, even the word Marxism looks like taboo.
What can I say? This is a question to ask the Brazilian left.
But this is the whole world, no?
No, not in our. No, you're right. The whole world.
You have to be like a Democrat left, as if the Marxists were not Democrats.
Right. No, you're right. I agree. I was being too. In English, you say I was being precious. I was being too insincere, maybe, about my answer. It is a complication. We are penalized by the way in which imperialism has talked about communism.
Yes, and in your book, you wrote about it, about how CIA destroy the Stalin and Nasser and compare them to Hitler in order to weaken the communist movement. In your bullets, wash the bullets, you have a piece on this.
Yeah, I mean, it is. We do face this, constant attacks and so on. Look, does communism done something dramatically worse than any other system? Trotsky was exiled from the USSR, sitting in Turkey. He wrote his History of the Russian Revolution. It's a brilliant book. And in it, Trotsky writes that, the capitalists say to the Soviet Union, Soviet Republic, they say that you have failed. And it was, I've forgotten now, 1930 maybe, that he was there, or 31. He said, you have failed. And he said, capitalism has been there for centuries. And it keeps failing. And they keep saying, give us more time. We are making improvements. We'll finally take care of poverty. He says, we've only been for 10 years. And they already told us we failed. I like that line in Trotsky's book. We've only been for 10 years. Soviet Union only lasted for 70 years. You know what's funny, guys? Soviet Union collapsed 1991, right? That's already now almost 30 years ago. Soon, the Soviet Union would have been gone for about half the time that it existed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I am 53 years old. I was born in 1967. 1967 was the 50th anniversary of the Soviet Union, right? Then 23 years later or so, 24 years later, it collapsed. So I was born 2/3 of the way through the Soviet Union's history. It only lasted 70 years. Last week, my mother died. She was 91 years old. My mother, who was a great person and a great soul, lasted longer than the Soviet Union. Now, when people judge these experiments, what are they judging? A 91-year-old, 70-year-old experiment in Northern Asia and part of Europe. What are they judging in China? The Chinese Revolution was 1949. That's now 72 years old, just 1 year older than the whole USSR this year, China is. China is 72 years old this year. It's now 1 year older than the USSR. 72. Nowadays, 72 is a middle-aged person. Because people live to 100 or 90. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
These are very young projects. So when people say to me, what did the Chinese do? What did the Russians do? I feel like, guys, what can compare to the extermination of the American Indians?
Mhm.
What can compare to the extermination of the American Indian population from Canada down to Chile? Look at the Mapuche today. Look at the situation. What can compare? You're talking about the Gulag. You're getting all upset about the gulags in, Stalin's Russia. But what about what happened in the plains of the United States when the Yankees just rode through and just massacred whole families? Please, when Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, he said that in America they killed all the native people and created Lebensraum, he said. Living space, Lebensraum. He said, I want to do to the Slavs what the Yankees did to the Indians. He writes this in Mein Kampf. So focus on this. Why you keep talking about the Gulag? Look at this behavior. Look at how this system was created. Look at the amount of people that were sold as slaves in Brazil, in the United States, in the Caribbean. What kind of disgusting history is this? Why you keep obsessing about the Gulag? That lasted for about 6-7 years. You're obsessed with these few years when this history is hundreds of years of brutality. So my feeling is I feel sad that we have to carry this burden. But I also reject the burden because I say you have your own burden. If you want me to face up to the ugliness of the history of my kind of ideology, when have you faced your own history? Don't point the finger at me without pointing the finger at yourself.
And I wonder if socialism and the Soviet Union was such a failure, why does this it still appears as a dangerous ghost haunting your world?
You know, the other day at the Progressive International, a man said in one of the sessions that Marxist-Leninism is anachronistic. He said it's junk, throw it out, Marxist-Leninism. And I said, but I'm alive. Now, I don't mean to say that I am Marxist-Leninism. What I mean to say is how can it be an anachronistic ideology if people like us still believe it? You see, there are many ideologies that you might say are anachronistic. Maybe religion is anachronistic, but people still believe it. I don't disrespect people who have religious beliefs. I want to understand why they believe that. Marxist-Leninism is not anachronistic. As I said, it's a good way to understand capitalism. Rather than dismiss me saying you are anachronistic, why not ask me, why do you believe in these ideas? Then I can tell you, look at the capitalist system. You have enough food to feed people. You have people who are hungry. Why can't the people who are hungry get the food? Because they don't have money. Because of dispossession, because of capitalism. How can money be the barrier between a human being and food? That's an analysis of capitalism. That's a Marxist approach to capitalism. How is it anachronistic? It will only be anachronistic if people get food. The moment you are able to feed people and you have no hunger in the planet, then Marxism might be anachronistic. I'm waiting for the day when Marxism is anachronistic. A Marxist, want Marxism to be history. But Marxism will only become history when we transcend the capitalist system. Then we'll need a new interpretation of the failures of the next system. Because the next system will have failures. But we'll need a new theory of its failures. And we'll give it another name. Currently, the theory we call Marxism is a theory of the failures of the capitalist system. And if the capitalist system has failures, Marxism has a good explanation for it. By the way, the word Marxism doesn't refer to old Marx all the time. It refers to our understanding of the contradictions of the system. And so that's how I would see it. People say, oh, you're a Marxist, you're crazy, whatever. That's okay. I'm crazy for lots of reasons. I'm also just crazy. And don't blame Marxism for my craziness. I'm crazy because of the music I like to listen to and play and so on.
What's the music you like to hear and play?
Well, I have a range of music. Obviously, I like the Clash because my book, Washington Bullets, is named after a Clash song from the album Sandinista. Obviously, I like the Clash. I like a lot of punk music from that era, punk and post-punk music. I like a lot of American bands, as it turns out, the Dead Kennedys. I like Joy Division. I like that kind of music, but I also like very sad songs. I like Joni Mitchell. I like Leonard Cohen. I like songs that make me cry. I like songs to make me feel sad, if I'm honest with you, because I feel sad a lot inside me. And I like to listen to songs that harmonize with my inside sadness. So that's the kind of music I like. I also like punk rock music because I also feel angry. And I'm not an angry person. I'm telling you, I don't lose my temper very much or at all, really. I mean, I just don't lose my temper. I don't get angry. So I like punk rock music because it surrounds me with other people's anger sometimes. I want to feel their anger. But I like sad music a lot. I like sad Indian songs a lot. I think listening to sadness gives me a kind of grip on reality. Brazilian music is very sad, by the way. It's too sad for me. It's very sad. Sad love songs about heartbreak.
Okay.
Well, Vijay, we'd like to thank you very much for your time in this interview. Maybe we'll have other times to meet again,
Yes.
and then because we'll have
I
lots
have
of
a lot of questions here. But...
We'll meet again. Now, when I come to Brazil next, we shall meet again. And hopefully we can have a nice drink together.
Sure.
I would like to say that I don't drink sweet drinks. So I am not a fan of the caipirinha. But I do like cachaça. So we'll sit and drink.
You can have the purinha.
Perfect. So when I'm in Brazil next, I shall meet the two of you and we can do an interview in person. Maybe this time I'll interview you.
Oh, great.
And in the tradition of the interviews here in TUTAMÉIA, we'd like to before the end of your saying goodbye to the people that are with us here and will be with us in the internet, we'd like to leave the floor to you. No questions, just your message or what you'd like to say to these people that are with us and that will be with us in the internet.
Well, what I would say is that for a lot of people like you and I, Rodolfo, Eleonora, myself, this pandemic and the lockdown has been very hard for lots of people mentally, socially, psychologically, very difficult. Our kind of people are used to being on the streets. We are used to demonstrating to make our points clear. We're used to embracing each other. We are very social type people, I can see that the two of you are very social people. And to be isolated for us is like being under house arrest. And I just want to say that I want to send my very sincere love and consideration to people, and in the hope that we all find the courage to allow ourselves to get through this house arrest pandemic. And on the other side of things, we'll go and dance in the street and we'll demonstrate in the street and we'll make it clear to the Modis and the Bolsonaros and others that we're still here. We're not broken. We're still alive and we still refuse to accept their rule. And we're not sad anymore. We're not sad.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Tchau, pessoal. Muito obrigado pela participação. Essa entrevista foi feita em inglês, mas a gente vai ter a reportagem no site. Não deixe de acompanhar no tutameia.jor.br. Tchau.